Hello. All right, let's talk about the penis. So the penis, as we see in this picture here, has different type of different tubes of tissue. So kind of orienting ourselves here, we're looking kind of um, at the superior view of it. Here we can see that there is this whole section of the penis that's actually internal. It's called the root of the penis. And then we have the outer portion of what we think of or we'll see as the shaft or the body of the penis. And at the end of it is the glans penis. The foreskin that covers the glans is called the prepuce, okay? And then we see that the urethra is running throughout the penis, right? That delivers not only urine, but now we're talking about the sperm cells and secretory fluid we're going to learn about that we'll call the ejaculate. And so the blue is what I want to talk to you. So this is a cross section of the penis. And notice here that there are these two large tubes of tissue called the corpus cavernosa, or singular would be corpus cavernosum. Okay, so that's singular. Okay. And so where these guys live, like look at how we've got the dorsal vessels and nerves, and then the urethra is right here and is surrounded by its own tissue we're going to learn about. And so these are kind of on the anterior surface. So they'd be closest or furthest away from the body in a flaccid penis, which is what we're looking at here. Okay, so the corpus cavernosa, let's talk about those first. Again, these are these two structures. Oops. Okay. There we go. So they're cavernous, they're large. Cavernosum. Okay. And again, there's two of them, so cavernosa. And they're basically these two large bodies of tissue that go along the whole length of the body of the penis or the shaft. They're kind of porous in nature because they basically contain these cavernous pores that become engorged with blood during sexual stimulation. And so that engorgement then causes an erection, which is important because that provides the erection to insert the penis into the vagina, but also helps prevent, so let's write that, insert penis, that's the point, into vagina, obviously. Okay, and then the other point is to prevent that urethra that's running through it from collapsing. Okay, during the erection, during sex, and then during the delivery of the ejaculate. Okay, we don't want the tube to collapse because then you can't transport the gametes right to the female. All right. So then kind of underneath that, and a much smaller body of tissue is the corpus spongiosum. Okay, so which surrounds specifically the spongy urethra. And so really the spongiosum, actually very little of it fills with blood during an erection. Okay, but it does enlarge some during sexual stimulation. Okay, so I want to move on and talk about the accessory glands of the male reproductive system. There are 3 different glands that are part of the male reproductive system, and 2 out of the 3 make secretions that contribute to the ejaculate. Whereas this third one does not. So we're going to go through systematically and talk about each of these different accessory glands. Okay, first one are called the seminal vesicles, or also called the seminal glands in some textbooks. Okay, so either is appropriate. This is about 60% of the volume of semen or the ejaculate. Okay, there are about 20 to 30 individual glands that are separated from each other by connective tissue. Okay, and these glands are lined with pseudostratified columnar epithelium. There is a smooth muscle layer underneath that epithelium. So that means that this gland is going to contract, and it is going to contract during ejaculation. Okay, the secretion that then is fed into the ejaculatory duct, right? This little stretch of tubing. Sorry, my pen's not working so great. This little stretch of tubing, right? You can see it gets secreted into the ejaculatory duct. So this little gland, and there's 2 of them, sits kind of on the back side of the bladder. And so there's 2 that kind of make a bit of a V on the back of the bladder there. And so each one of these has 20 to 30 glands. And so then, like I said, the secretion that is made is viscous and milky in consistency. Okay. And the reason why it's thick or viscous is that there are sugars that are present to basically feed the sperm cells to power the flagella of the sperm cells. Because they're basically doing like a 5K race in a way to get, and they have to go all the way up the uterus and 2/3 of the way up these fallopian tubes that we're going to look at. Okay, so they got to have a lot of energy on hand. These are like little gels if you're an athlete, right? You do gels while you're running or something, right? So this is what's going to power those sperm cells to make it all the way to the end of the race. And then, just a little interesting, there are these molecules called flavins that will fluoresce under UV light. So if you've ever seen, right, or done it yourself, where people check like for cleanliness of hotels with UV lights, and they're looking for this component of semen that is made by the seminal glands. Okay, so next gland we're going to look at is the prostate gland, which sits inferior. It's this round structure that sits inferior to the bladder. And we see that it has embedded within it the ejaculatory duct, as well as the prostatic urethra, right? And so this gland also contains a number of its own individual glands. It's somewhere around 50 individual glands. Okay. And they basically empty the secretions into the wall through the walls of the prostatic urethra. So it doesn't have its own duct like we see with the seminal gland. It just dumps its secretions through the walls of the prostatic urethra. Oops. Oopsies. Oh, come on. This is like delayed, sorry. Okay, so secretions get dumped into the prostatic urethra. And then of course there is smooth muscle present within on the outside of this gland as well. So just like the seminal glands or seminal vesicles, that when it contracts, it will help to push those secretions out into the walls of the urethra to become part of the ejaculate. Kind of some neat things about the secretions. It's 30% of the seminal fluid or semen. Okay. The secretion is weakly acidic. Does contain sugars. It contains antimicrobial compounds like seminal plasmin. It also contains, this is kind of neat, contains an enzyme that basically clots the semen so that the semen will actually adhere to the walls of the cervix or vagina. Yeah. Okay, and then about 30 minutes later after that, there's another enzyme that will then basically liquefy to free this semen, to free the sperm to swim. So it kind of turns on 20 to 30 minutes later to liquefy, kind of neat, the semen to free sperm cells to swim. Okay. Now the last gland we're going to look at is the bulbourethral gland, or the Cowper's gland, which are these little glands that sit below the prostate gland here and has a little duct that feeds into the spongy urethra down here at the root of the penis. So what we're looking at here is we're looking at the penis, and the root of it we can see starting all the way internally here. Okay. Right, this is internal. This is like the coxal bone, the front of it. Okay, so this is anterior, this is posterior. Where we're kind of looking. So we're looking at a side view, and again, it's sitting underneath the prostate gland. And this secretion is not part of the ejaculate. Okay, the secretion happens before ejaculation, so basically during sexual stimulation. Okay, and the secretion is basic or mucus-like. And so it's thought that its functions are therefore to provide lubrication for sex, but also to flush out any acidic urine residue out of the urethra. So that the sperm cells don't encounter acid, because like most forms of life, most things aren't designed to deal with acid. Acid kills. And so we want to make sure that those sperm cells don't encounter an acidic environment as they're being transported through that urethra. And so that is one of the thoughts on the functions of the fact that it's a basic type of secretion. Okay, so then erection and ejaculation happen after or during during sex, right? Eventually ejaculation will happen. And there's kind of two parts to ejaculation. There is the emission, and that is caused by peristalsis. That's happening along the vas deferens. It's happening within our accessory gland, the accessory glands as well, right? The seminal glands and the prostate gland. And remember, the epididymis also undergoes peristalsis to move the sperm cells out of the epididymis, okay? And then that leads to expulsion, which is the contraction of the muscles of the pelvic floor, okay? And so it's not that the sperm cells are swimming out. No, they're being contracted out at a very quick force, and anywhere from 2 to 5 milliliters of semen can then be deposited in the female, and per milliliter, right? Per milliliter, there can be anywhere from 20 to 100 million sperm cells. Okay, so that kind of is an interesting thing to think about, that you can see that there is a spectrum. There's a spectrum between individuals, and then there's a spectrum within an individual. So that certain expulsions will yield a higher concentration or a higher amount of semen compared to other other events. Okay, all right, this is where I'm going to stop. So in the next video, we will then explore the female reproductive system. Okay, we'll see ya.